Hello, I'm Jyotika. Welcome to Excelling Psychology. Today's video is going to be a little different from my other videos. In my videos, usually I take some specific board, take a past paper from it, or take some questions from it and solve those and show you how you should write your answers. Today, I'm taking up a general principle for evaluation of studies in psychology, and this lesson will be useful for students across boards. So, regardless of whether you're doing AQA, Cambridge, IB, or EdExcel, this lesson will help you to evaluate your studies in psychology. And across boards, evaluation is a very important aspect of studying psychology. Critical thinking is key for writing your long essay answers, especially. So, this lesson should be useful to all of you. Okay, when it comes to evaluating studies, students have come across a lot of acronyms like TEACH, GRAVE, PEAL. One of the most common ones that students ask me about is GRAVE. They've heard it in their schools or they've seen it online, but they don't really understand what it stands for and how it is to be used in analysis. They know what each letter of the acronym stands for, but they don't know how to put it to practice. So that is what we will be learning in this video. What does GRAVE stand for? How you are to look out for each evaluation point that each letter stands for. And what I'll do is I will illustrate my points with the Milgram study. So I will show you how to do a GRAVE analysis of Milgram study of obedience. Now, very deliberately, I've taken Milgram study because it is applicable to all the boards. Students from every board learn about Milgram obedience study. So hopefully you have learned it too, and you will be able to follow the principles as I apply them to that study. Okay, so let's begin. GRAVE, as you know, is an acronym, and what you are to do with it is take any study that you need to evaluate. Perhaps you're preparing your essay outline and you want to have strong AO3 evaluation points for your essay. So you think of the study in your mind. Like, first step is to read the study and understand it very well. And then one at a time, you start taking a letter from this acronym and start putting up your study against it and see where your study stands with respect to that evaluation. For example, in GRAVE, first we have G. G stands for generalizability. So if I am analyzing the Milgram study, for example, I would think of how generalizable is the Milgram study. Now, how to put it to practice? What exactly am I thinking when I'm thinking about the generalizability of Milgram study? I'm thinking about two things. One, sample to population generalizability. And I've seen that this comes very quickly to students' minds when they hear of generalizability. They quickly think about the sample characteristics, which is good. But there is one more type of generalizability that you need to know about. That is generalizability to real world settings. So, applicability of the study to real world settings. So these are two things you need to think about when you take up generalizability for analysis of a study. Let's begin with the first one. When you think about sample to population generalizability, mainly there are two questions you need to ask yourself. Do the characteristics of the sample of this study represent the population, the characteristics of the population to which we want to generalize or we want to apply findings? And the second question you can ask is the sampling technique used helpful in obtaining a sample that represents the population? First, let's address these two questions with help of the Milgram study. So you'll see actually how I'm applying them. And then we'll come to the next question. It's going to be about applicability of settings. Okay, so first coming to characteristics of the sample. Whichever study we have in question, I hope you know the characteristics of it. Like say for example, I'm using Milgram right now, perhaps you're thinking of another study. Just think about the sample characteristics. If you don't know it already, open the resource from which you're looking at the study, be it the original paper or the textbook or some online resource. Look at it, check out the characteristics. Now, when I say characteristics of the sample, I don't mean the technique which has been used. So, not whether it is random or stratified or volunteer sampling, not those things. What is the gender distribution in the sample? How many males and females were there? What background were the participants coming from? Were they coming from the upper class, middle class, poor class? How educated were they? What was their working background? How many participants were there? And anything else that is relevant to the study, definitely it will be presented in the resource that you're referring to. Not all of the characteristics that I have mentioned are applicable or relevant to every study. So whichever study you've taken, what is relevant to that? You just have to consider those features. When it comes to Milgram, we see that there's a heavy emphasis on the fact that there are all men in the sample. So there were 40 men in Milgram's original study of obedience. And they came from a variety of educational and work-related backgrounds. So variety of professions, like there were teachers, bank clerks, and doctors, engineers. These are which are coming to my mind right now. I'm sure you can find more about this. As regards educational backgrounds, there were those who had not even completed high school and those who had doctoral level degrees. So there was a range of educational backgrounds as well. So it was a very diverse sample in terms of educational background and professions. Also, they all belong to the same area, which is New Haven, Connecticut. So number of features I have listed here: the sample size, gender, profession, education background, and the area from which they came. Now considering the generalizability question. First, you must think of what is the target population. When the researcher is studying obedience, to whom do you think they want to apply the findings of obedience? Did Milgram mention anything like he's doing the study only to understand how obedient teachers are, or how obedient clerks are, or how obedient doctors are? No, in fact, he has explicitly mentioned he wants to show that anyone would be obedient in a pressurizing situation, right? That means his target population is all of the people in the world. So he does not have any restricted population to which he wants to apply findings. Considering that, you always have to have the target population in mind. So considering that he wants to generalize findings to everybody in the world, do you think now that this sample truly represents everybody in the world? To that extent, it will be generalizable, to the extent that it represents everyone. As far as having only men is concerned, which really stands out prominently, means the results cannot be generalized to females. When it comes to situations of obedience, definitely obedience can be demanded from females also, not only from males. So in that case, we would say that these findings, which are with men, that they've been found to be highly obedient in the study, maybe women would be found to be even more obedient or less obedient than them. Not necessarily the type or level of obedience they have shown would be seen in the case of women as well. So definitely it is difficult to generalize findings to women. It would also be difficult to generalize to people beyond the New Haven area in the USA itself, or from the USA to other cultures, say more collectivist cultures. When it comes to cultural consideration, though it's a little different issue, but very well comes within the scope of generalizability as well. Okay, I'll just note something and then I'll explain a little about it to you. When it comes to cultural consideration, definitely most studies are done in a given culture, in one country which has its own culture. Now, when we say that the findings would not generalize to other cultures, we need to be able to justify why. For everything, we need to have a reasoning. For example, in the case of females, I have mentioned that obedience can be demanded from females as well. It's not a social phenomenon that is exclusive to men. So, that is why definitely when it comes to females, it would be difficult to apply, given that females are known to be a little more empathetic by nature, a little more easy to give in to authority because they've been conditioned in that way. A little suppressive socialization is done such that they're expected to obey authority figures. What I'm trying to say here is whenever we think of the generalizability question, it is not that, say, only one type of people are there in the study, so automatically findings will not generalize to other cultures. There has to be some difference between the people who are there in the study and to whom we want to apply the findings. In that case, we would have the suspicion that maybe findings would not apply to people in the population. So, given that men and women are different, women have a different approach when it comes to social interaction, we believe what is found with men would not exactly represent what would be found with women. Another example, coming to the culture, what is found in the USA might not apply to other cultures. But which cultures? Is it that simply because the study has been done in USA, the findings would not apply to any culture at all in the world? Not necessarily. The USA is an individualistic culture, so are many other Western cultures which are there. So findings could well apply there. To which type of culture would findings not apply? To a collectivist culture. Again, what is the reasoning behind that? Because in collectivist cultures, also what we find is power distance. It goes along with collectivism. Authority figures are highly respected to the point of being feared when it comes to collectivist cultures. So, in an individualist culture like the USA, if people are showing high levels of obedience, it is likely that in collectivist cultures, given its power distance, people are more likely to show obedience, even higher levels than the ones which were seen in this study. So, some reasoning has to be there. Many students have a too or a simplistic approach when it comes to generalizability. Okay, males were there, so it won't apply to females. It was done in USA, just cannot apply anywhere else in the world. Not true. If who is there in the sample matches the one in the population, even if they are not exactly like the person in the population, still findings will generalize. Like the study has been done in the USA, the UK is also an individualist culture. Now we can't argue that just because it's been done in the USA, findings will not apply to the UK. They might as well apply to people from the UK as well. Why? Because it is also an individualistic culture. So there's something in common. It all boils down to you need to have some reasoning behind every point that you're making, behind every evaluation that you're giving. When you say something's not generalizable, not replicable, not valid, some logic has to be there behind that. And that is what is missing when it comes to students thinking in most cases. Critical thinking is all about reasoning. So that cannot be something that is left out of your thinking. So when you take a concern like generalizability, think through it. Like I have just given you examples of how you have to think through. Okay, now if we look at the sample size, it is always debatable what size of a sample should we have for us to be able to consider findings are generalizable or not. As a rule of thumb, a sample of 30 is considered to be good in psychology, 30. That goes by the central limit theorem in statistics when it comes to inferential statistics. Of course, I will not get into the details of that because across boards I have seen Some boards just touch upon inferential statistics, others don't cover it at all. So I'm sure most of y'all don't have a good idea of inferential statistics. But you can just know for now, according to some statistical theory, there is a need to have a minimum of a sample of 30 for us to be able to consider that most probably the findings will generalize to the population. Your teacher might have taught it to you as a rule of thumb. Here we have a sample of 40. So I would not say that the sample size is too low for generalizability. The sample size seems fair enough. Coming to the diversity in professions and educational backgrounds, that's a plus in this study. That's a good thing about generalizability. As we see in this study, Milgram has deliberately selected participants who would represent all walks of life because he wanted to show that obedience is not dispositional, it is situational. So no matter whom the person is, once they're put under a pressurizing situation, they will be obedient. He wanted to show that. So this sample aligns with the aim of his study. So that is more a matter of validity. We can consider it later. But even right now, when it comes to generalizability, this diversity increases the generalizability of the study because that high level of obedience which is found in this study, we can successfully apply it to the population, people coming from many walks of life. So there is good generalizability to people from different professions and educational backgrounds. In the population. So this would be my analysis of the generalizability of the Milgram study. I know there might be many other things that are coming to your mind. Definitely, studies have so much detail in them. If we go to see how these studies have been done, there's so many features that we can think of different evaluation points. So maybe I'm overlooking something important right now which is coming to your mind, which is very good. If you're using your critical thinking, you're able to think of something beyond what I have written, that's excellent. So don't worry about things like whatever is coming to my mind has to come in yours only, that is fixed. There is only one way of evaluating the study. Definitely not. These are just examples. This is just to show to you how you should think about it. This is not a hard and fast way of thinking about the Milgram study. I'm only using the study as an example. That also only what is coming to my mind right now. I'm able to present only that much. Okay, so the first thing we consider when doing a generalizability analysis is, like I said, the characteristics of the sample. Now coming to the sampling technique. Different sampling techniques have different limitations when it comes to generalizability, as we have learned. Theoretically, the only sampling technique which is highly generalizable is random sampling or anything that has been derived from random sampling. Only thing is, that is theoretical, like I said, and for that one condition is there: for a random sample to be truly representative, the sample size has to be large, again at least 30 or more. If it is a random sample but the size is very small, again generalizability concerns are there. So most sampling techniques do come with generalizability concerns. So what we have to consider, whichever study you're trying to analyze, think about the sampling technique that has been used. Is it biased in some way? What I mean by is it biased is, does it truly represent the population? Or is the technique such that in its selection, we are going to end up with people who do not represent the population? So again, to give you an example of this, in the Milgram study, volunteer sampling has been used. Volunteer sampling inevitably is poor when it comes to generalizability because it has a very strong sampling bias. When we seek volunteers for a study, we put an advertisement. In that advertisement, we write what the study is about, at least we give a general idea. And then people who are interested in that domain, they are the ones who respond. So inevitably, the people who are in the sample, they are those who are interested in the study, or they have some connection, like maybe when they are working in the same area in which the study is being done, they have some vested interest in participating in the study. Simply saying they do not represent those people who are not interested in the subject. So someone who's interested, say for example, in obedience, who would be interested in the topic of obedience? Hypothetically, I'm saying we don't know this. Maybe someone who is who has had a bad experience with authority figures, that person would come. But anyways, in Milgram study, that is not disclosed. At the time of doing the study, they are not told that it is something to do with obedience. Rather, what is written in the advertisement is a learning and memory type of experiment is taking place in Yale University, and they need participants for that. So regardless, now what can happen, I'll connect with the earlier point. Let's say now who will be interested in learning and memory type of study? Who must have volunteered for this study? Say people who have had, say, some sort of school experience in which their learning and memory was not good. Maybe they were not good in academics. So they want to participate in a study like this, and they want to know more about how learning and memory can be enhanced. Or maybe someone who wants to know about learning and memory so that they can help their children. Someone who's very interested in academics, like they have a personal interest in academics, so they want to participate. Like generally, this is what comes to mind. These must be the people who must be interested in participating. This is not what you have to write in the paper. I'm just trying to develop your reasoning, how you should think about it. Okay, so now if these are the types of people who are coming, who are interested in academics, who have had some bad experience in academics, something revolving around academics, relating it to the earlier point of those people participating who somehow have some linkage with obedience. What can happen is when we are very interested in academics, we might have had a lot of academic experiences with authority figures. Again, a hypothetical example, say I have not been good in my school in studying. So whenever it came to learning and memory, I used to be reprimanded a lot by my teachers. So they used to keep on scolding me, trying to get me to improve. So maybe I have a fear of authority since that time. Or conversely, I might have good respect for authority because I used to see that how much they used to try to push me and try to get me to do better when it comes to learning and memory. They used to try to improve my learning and memory. Simply saying the people who have volunteered in this study, maybe they have something to do with obedience directly or indirectly. Like I've given you an example, indirectly. Some experiences with authority figures or some interest that they have in authority figures which is beyond usual, beyond what usual people have. And that is why they are participating in this study. They don't know it is about obedience. But because of the fact that they are told it's about learning and memory, that is somehow indirectly relating with obedience. And that is why they are participating in this study. Now, if they have something to do with obedience and they are participating not intentionally, unintentionally, what findings we get from them, like they are highly obedient, could be a result of their past experiences. Because they have been fearful or respectful of authority figures, so they were very obedient. The rest of the people in the population who did not participate in this study, perhaps they don't have that sort of respect or fear for authority figure. So if we were to get some of them into this study, we would have not seen the high levels of obedience which we have seen in this study. Simply saying the findings from this sample would not generalize to those people not interested in topics like learning, memory, and therefore not having anything to do with authority figures or obedience, or having very less thoughts about obedience. That is the problem with volunteer sampling. So many times when I ask students what is the problem with volunteer sampling, quickly they come up with they share characteristics. They are different from the rest of the population. But are you able to reason out and see in this way, like I have exemplified, why in this particular study that might be an issue? Try to develop your reasoning that way. Like try to think beyond what is given in the textbook or in the resource. Okay, so coming to Milgram's study, when I do a generalizability analysis for the sampling technique, I would say that findings would not generalize to those not interested in learning and memory in the population. Why? Because the study was advertised as such. The study was advertised as those who are interested in these topics, or those who wish to participate in such topics should come forward. So I hope you're able to see how you should be doing the analysis. And of course, you can make notes just like I'm making right now. But if you want to know, after doing all these analysis, how are you to apply it in your answers? For your AO3 answers, exactly which points do you take? How do you structure? How do you put these down in a PAIL format? You can watch some of my other videos, or you can contact me for private tuition. I tutor across boards for psychology. So if you schedule your classes with me, I will help you take down all this advice into formulating your answers for your paper. I'll give you personalized guidance, and I will teach you exactly how to implement this in answer writing so that you can get your A and A star grades. Now coming to applicability of the study to real world settings, which is one more type of generalizability. Here you need to think about two things: mundane realism and ecological validity. Okay, many of you would feel that this is better covered in validity. I feel it is better covered in generalizability. So many people feel ecological validity is one form of external validity. In the grave format, it should be taken under validity concern. I feel it has more to do with generalizability, so I would take it here. Regardless of where we put it, the acronym is not a fixed way of doing analysis. We don't have to give a grave analysis in the paper. It's for our understanding, for making notes. So that is why we can fit it wherever we like. The effect is going to be the same. Like, it's going to help us equally well to answer the paper. Okay, so coming to applicability, I need to ask myself two questions. As I mentioned, one is about the mundane realism of the study, and the second is about ecological validity. Okay, I'll just correct something. Now, many students are not able to differentiate between mundane realism and ecological validity. And I'm also aware that in many textbooks, the terms are used interchangeably. But actually, there's a slight distinction between them. When it comes to mundane realism, we have to think whether the tasks in a study, or the tests, or the questions, do they represent real life tasks, which would be under that topic which is being studied. So what we have to think is, do the tasks in the study represent or replicate real world tasks in the area? Okay, and for ecological validity, you think about the settings. You don't think about the tasks. Do the settings in which the study was conducted represent real life settings where the phenomenon would be observed? So first, let's consider the first question, which is about tasks in the study. Another way of thinking about it is, you can think about how artificial are the tasks in the study. So are the tasks realistic or artificial? That is what you're thinking about. Now, what will determine whether they're artificial or realistic is, what is the larger topic which is being studied, which behavior is being studied. In Milgram's study, obedience was being looked into. So when it comes to obedience, the task they were made to do is deliver electric shocks to a person who's not able to learn a list of words correctly, paired associate words. Is this how obedience is commanded in the real world? Like, when an authority figure wants someone to obey, do they ask the person to deliver electric shocks to that person in the context of they're not able to learn a list of words, so they have to be given shocks? Is this how obedience occurs in the real world? Or is this how obedience to learning and memory tasks takes place in the real world? That is what you need to think about. What happens is, because many students assume mundane realism and ecological validity is the same thing, They always talk about standard things. It was a lab setting, it was a controlled setting, lighting was controlled, noise was controlled, distractions were controlled. Now, I have many objections to that. Firstly, that is not mundane realism. Secondly, as I always say, when you become very fixed on no matter what is asked, I'm going to answer this only. So, whichever lab study is there, lighting, noise, temperature. I have just memorized these three words and I'm going to fit them in wherever it comes. You go into giving generic answers. Your analysis is very generic. So just avoid thinking in those terms totally. Always be relevant to whichever study is at hand. So that's why I'm showing you how you have to think about it is always in the context of obedience, in the context of what Milgram was researching. Were the tasks realistic? Never think in terms of it's a lab study, task is artificial, so it will not apply to real life. If this is what you're going to write, you barely get 1 mark or maybe 0 marks for writing this, because this is a point you could fit into any study. It's not contextualized. So coming back to mundane realism, in Milgram, as I mentioned, delivering shocks for someone being unable to learn a list of words. Are these the type of tasks which are done to get obedience from people in the real world? Definitely not. Yes, people can be asked to deliver shocks to others in a military setting. That can be a form of torturing someone else. So an authority figure might ask his subordinate to deliver shocks to someone else, but it will not be in the context of memorizing a list of words. That will not be the task which is being done. It will have to do with something of national level importance, some sort of breach which is taking place. So definitely this task is artificial. So in Milgram, there is an artificial task which is administering shocks for a person's inability or failure to learn certain words on a list. So it is artificial. That means we will not be able to generalize the findings, the high level of obedience which is found when it comes to more real world tasks. I will, like I said, I'm not covering much about answer writing right now, but even in your analysis, you can do this. Whenever you're thinking of a point like this, like it's artificial, also simultaneously think about what would be a more realistic task. If Milgram wanted to generalize to real tasks, what sort of a task should have been there in the study? Doesn't matter whether it was ethically possible or not. Keep ethical concerns aside, like don't mix two things. Don't mix ethics and generalizability. Regardless of ethics, what should he have done to be able to see real world obedience? So a more real task would be, say, getting someone to uh, if we have to take the word pair contextually, like learning, what do teachers do when students are not able to learn well, like to get them to learn properly? Teachers would scold the student. Depends on which country you're living, they might physically use some corporal punishment also, or they might just give some sort of indirect punishment to the student, like they have to write the words 100 times for homework which they don't remember. So those type of tasks would have been more realistic in the context of teaching and learning. So a real world task would be, instead of electric shocks, some form of scolding, reprimanding the learner, or alternatively, if that is not possible, then if this only has to be kept, electric shocks, because Milgram wants to see the gravity of obedience, to what extent people would be destructive. In that case, the task could have been more realistic. Instead of learning and memory, something like people are pretending to do some sort of security breach or national breach or something, and in that context they are being given shocks. So say the learner, they pretend is someone who has done a national level breach, has revealed some security secrets or something like that, then that would have made sense to give shocks to the person, because that is in the context in which we would see it in real life. So something like that. Okay, when it comes to ecological validity, as I mentioned, if we take it in the strict sense of the term and we don't confuse it with mundane realism, it has to do with the settings in which the study was conducted. As I've already pointed out, when you think about the settings, do not think about standard things like lighting, noise, and temperature. Like, don't have that rigidity. Many students come with this rigidity, 2 3 points they've memorized, and no matter what is asked to them, they just answer with those 2 3 words. It's very frustrating. Just think about, are you a parrot or something that something has been said and you're just going to go on repeating it everywhere? So be more respectful towards yourself also, and try to understand how it comes across. Whenever the teacher asks something and you give those standard replies, it has a very, very bad impression of you as a student. So start thinking beyond that. If you want to do well in psychology, please go beyond 2 3 words, fixed memorized answers, and start using your mind more in thinking. So when it comes to, you have to think about ecological validity of a study. In what settings was the Milgram study conducted? Yes, it was a lab setting. Specifically, what was there in the lab setting of Milgram? You have to think that. So there was this entire shock generator machine which had been created to convince the participant that real shocks are being given. So an actual switchboard with multiple voltage switches of shocks to be given. And there was this experimenter standing in a lab coat, and the rooms were separated. So Mr. Wallace, the learner, was in one room, and the teacher was, the genuine participant was in the other room. This was the artificial setting which was created. This is what is specifically there in the laboratory in which Milgram did the study. And there's this one-way mirror through which they are being video recorded, photographed, and they don't know about it. So these are the things which are very artificial in the settings of the study. When it comes to real world obedience, we are able to usually see the person whom we are torturing on command of an authority figure right in front of us. So it will not be like the person who's being tortured is in a separate room where they cannot be seen, and the person who's torturing is another room. That is generally not the arrangement. In the same way, that elaborate shock generator machine which is there, except for very exclusive military type of settings, again in everyday obedience situation, say in the classroom where the teacher is asking a student to be obedient, we're not going to find elaborate equipment such as the shock generator machine. That is what makes the settings of Milgram very artificial. So those are the things we need to mention, not standard noise, temperature. We don't even know about it, and that's not even very important in the study. So what we can say is definitely the settings are artificial. Given, like I said, the examples of the shock generator machine, the separation of the learner and the teacher such that the learner was not even visible. Recently, I've come across students telling me that their teachers are not allowing them to give examples beyond what is given in the book. So they can say something like the shock generator machine is fake, but they cannot give an example of what would be more realistic. It can be some teachers' personal opinion is that that should not be done, but I would suggest that you always mention, you always specify what would be more realistic. That fully shows like full development of your critical thinking. If you just say this is artificial but you can't relate it with something that would be more realistic, then somewhere again you're not able to fully contextualize to the study. It goes more in the area of generic. So you're able to point out that something is artificial, but you're not able to think through why it is artificial. You can think of why something is artificial only when you contrast it with something that would be more realistic given the behavior which is being studied, which in this case is obedience. So, in my strong opinion, you should be able to think of alternatives of what setting would be more realistic. In case your teacher discourages that, you can leave it aside, but I feel that is a better way of showing your critical thinking. So in this case, when it comes to Milgram, what would be more realistic is to do the study in an actual classroom which would be devoid of like a shock generator machine, which would have the usual setting, like there's just students around and the teacher who's asking the students to obey is right in front of the student, and say she's asking the student to reprimand another student or something, so that student is also present there, visible to the obeying student also and to the rest of the class also. So something that would be more realistic, or doing it in a military setting. Of course, not exactly with the shock generator equipment and all that type, which again, like I said, is to be rarely found in a military setting. Say with the usual military equipment which is there, which are used for what we would call torture tactics or destructive obedience. So, say uh, arms which are there, like guns, etc., something like that. Of course, like I said, from an ethical standpoint, that could be too dangerous. Of course, they wouldn't use real arms in the study, but I'm just telling you, keeping ethics aside, that would count for a more realistic setting than what that is. We are not suggesting that the study should have been done in such a setting. We are just saying that these are real settings where obedience is seen, and Milgram study is not close to these settings. Okay, so when it comes to generalizability analysis, these are the things which we need to consider. The next letter in the GRAVE acronym, which is R, stands for reliability, or interchangeably we can use reliability with replicability. Again, both are not the same. There is a slight distinction between them, but just to memorize what the letters in the acronym are standing for, this one you can remember as either reliability or replicability. Now, there is always, I think I mentioned in many videos, this major confusion between reliability and validity. Students just don't seem to connect correctly reliability with standardization and validity with control. It's as simple as that. Students, in fact, confuse so much between standardization and control. And I know many textbooks also take that approach, that because they're confusing the basis, the features on which these evaluations are based, that standardization and control, they don't see the distinction between reliability and validity itself. When it comes to reliability, we are talking about consistency or sameness in the procedure of the study. So, actually, it is very simple. You just have to consider what has been kept same or consistent across all participants. That's it. That's all you need to consider for reliability. Of course, there are finer things, uh, like this is to do with standardization. There are things beyond this, like, inter-rater, inter-observer reliability. I'll try to touch on those things also. But right now, when we are talking about reliability, sameness, or consistency, that's a different matter than looking at control. Control, as you know, is about preventing extraneous variables from influencing the dependent variable. When we are talking about sameness or consistency, we just mean how the procedure has been kept identical for all participants. Of course, if it's a lab experiment, there will be a manipulation of the IV. So, in that respect, two groups will be different. For example, most of you must have done Milgram's variation studies as well. So, you have seen, for example, if we take his, okay, that'll get complicated. Maybe let me take something else. Okay, most of you must have seen the study by Dement and Kleitman. Again, I've come across that in all boards. In AQA, it comes under biological rhythms. In Cambridge, it comes under a course study, and so forth. So, if you look at the Dement and Kleitman study, they are comparing participants across REM and NREM sleep stages. So, of course, the sleep stage is going to differ. If my IV is sleep stage and it's at two levels, REM sleep and NREM sleep, that is going to be different. But besides that, everything is going to be the same in the experiment. That's what you learn in standardization, that except for the manipulation or variance in the IV, everything else is kept identical for everybody. So here, that is what you're thinking about. What exactly has been kept the same for everyone? Recently, I remember one student was telling me how in her school, the example the teacher gives for standardization is, if you're getting a participant to have coffee, for example, what is the quantity of coffee that you're putting in? How long are you boiling the water? In which cup are you going to give the coffee? Definitely, that's a good example. But how is it relating to consistency? The fact that these measurements, the container in which the coffee is being in, everything has been kept same for the participant. So it has been kept fixed for everybody. That is the idea behind this example. So that's what you need to think about. Okay, so for example, when it comes to a study like Milgram or whichever study you are analyzing, what are you going to ask yourself under this? What was kept same for every participant in this study? Now, Milgram, in fact, is a controlled observation. It's not even a lab experiment. So there's no manipulation in it. Rather, what you get to see is the procedure is exactly identical for everybody because everybody is in the same condition. Only there's only one condition: destructive obedience is being commanded from the participants. So everyone is doing exactly the same thing, being instructed in the same way, getting to see the same things. There is no variation in this study. So there are a lot of examples, in fact, which we can give. Now, many students ask that when it comes to standardization or reliability, do we need to memorize very exact figures? For example, in a study, if the duration of some task has been kept constant across participants, do we have to remember the task is for these many seconds or minutes or whatever? Yes. There's a very strong preference that when it comes to your studies, like in Cambridge, the core studies which are there, they are directly given. Even in AQA, there are certain named studies in the syllabus. For IB, when it comes to ERQs, you are not to give every detail of a study, but when you're evaluating within that ERQ, you've decided I want to evaluate on basis of reliability, then in that case, you should be giving these details. If you don't plan to touch upon reliability, you can omit those things. In edexcel, again, you have very fixed key studies which are there, so definitely you should know about exact details. So when it comes to what are we keeping same for everybody in the Milgram study, the shock generator machine, the voltages of the shock were the same for all participants, the shocks which they had to deliver. Now when I'm writing it, do I have to write specifically? Yes. So what I have to do is I have to mention that the shocks range from 15 volts to 450 volts. Those numbers I have to be able to give. The shock switches were numbered from 1 to 30. Those details I have to be able to give. If I'm talking about the prods which the authority figure used to get the participant to obey, yes, the prods I have to memorize and be able to write, like please continue, please go on. The experiment requires that you must go on. I should be able to write verbatim what was told to the participants in the prod. So choose wisely when you're preparing your analysis. Like what I'm assuming is once you learn this lesson, for your studies, you'll be jotting down notes just like I'm doing or something similar to this. At that point, think of it like this is what preparation is in psychology. Think about it that when the study comes, when I'm going to take the point of reliability, out of so many things that are there in the procedure, these are the ones for which I'm going to remember fixed figures, numbers, or words like verbatim speech. And this is what I'm going to give in the paper. So make sure you memorize at least that much from the study. It's there in your notes. You need to memorize how much you're noting down at the preparation stage. Rest of, there's too much given in any resource. There's a lot you can memorize. You can ignore that because you've already planned which are the details which you will include in the paper. So when it comes to Milgram study, for example, what was kept same was, as I mentioned, the shock levels. They were ranging from 1 to 30, from 15 volts to 450 volts. Another example was every participant, genuine participant, got a sample shock of 45 volts exactly. And as I mentioned earlier, if you want to include any of the prods, you want to include how uh, everyone was being observed through one-way mirror and photographs, videos were being taken per, I think it was 2 or 5 minutes. I don't remember exactly how frequently the photographs used to be taken. So whichever detail you want to give in standardization, you can include. It can also be about drawing the chits in the rigged lottery, always on both the chits teacher was written. anything. It's just that whatever you give it in as specific detail as possible when it comes to standardization. Other questions that you can ask in reliability besides standardization, like standardization is always applicable. In selected studies, you will see things like special measures for reliability. Okay, so things like was there any test retest reliability or inter-observer inter-rater reliability that was established? I'm restricting to only these. I know there are also like things like internal consistency or even reliability, but generally we don't come across much in any of the syllabi. I've not seen. I've usually seen mention of inter-observer and test retest reliability. So I'm just restricting to these. In the case of Milgram study, we don't have any evidence for test retest or inter-observer reliability. So here it is not found. But in your study which you are analyzing, if it has been the case, you can take it as a strong point for reliability. Any sort of test, retest, inter-rater, inter-observer enhances reliability. Like I know in most curricula, you do the Bandura study, Bobodol study. In that you've seen how there's both inter-rater reliability. At the beginning, when the children are being assigned to their respective conditions, it's a match design. So at that time, when they want to decide which child goes to which condition, Bandura and the nursery school teacher both rate the children on their natural aggression and they cross-verify the ratings with each other. So that's inter-rater reliability. And later on, when the children are being tested for delayed imitative aggression, at that time, Bandura and Sina Bandura, the male model, acts as an observer, and there's a third party observer whom they get in. Both of them observe the children and cross validate their findings. So, both instances, inter-rater, inter-observer, you find in a study like Bandura. So, you can take it as a plus. Coming to the next thing in the GRAVE acronym, we have A, which is application to everyday life. Here also there's this very common mistake which is made by students. Whenever it comes to application, again they have rote learned something which is, it helps to understand something better. Like when it comes to Milgram study, it is all about, it helps to understand obedience better. Now we have a theory of obedience. Now we know why obedience occurs. Now we are clear that obedience happens because of situational factors. That is not application to everyday life. Another mistake is to confuse with ecological validity. It was in an artificial setting, so findings will not apply to everyday life. It was in a laboratory, so there is no application of the study. If we go by that the study was done in a laboratory control setting, so application is not there, then most of the studies in psychology will have no practical relevance. The first step is to understand that when they're asking you about application to everyday life, they are not asking you about ecological validity and they are not asking you about the theoretical understanding that you've gained from the study. They are asking you about the practical relevance of the findings. This is key. And what do we mean by practical relevance of the findings? You need to ask yourself, where can the findings of this study be applied in practice? Where can we actually use these findings of the study? In what intervention? In what treatment? How can we help people with the findings of this study? That is what we are trying to think about. Not about how it furthers our theoretical knowledge. No, that anyways, any study is done only to support a theory. What are you bringing about what sort of critical thinking about are you bringing when you say that the study helps to validate the theory? Of course, that is what the study has been done for. So that doesn't make sense. And when you talk about ecological validity, that's a different concern altogether, as we have seen. Application is all about practical usefulness of the study. Where can it be used in practice? Like I've said, in actually helping somebody. You can think of it that way. Now, there is an implication, like they don't say it outright always, but when it comes to application, your applications must be ethical. You're not to suggest something destructive, like something which can harm others. Generally, that's not application because, of course, psychologists won't be using the findings of a study in a way to cause harm in society. So, if that is the sort of application which you suggest, it will be downmarked. In the sense, you won't score anything for it because uh, what would make you feel that a psychologist would use some finding to cause harm? Doesn't make sense. You have to think about actually how a psychologist would use it in real terms. So if I say Milgram study can be used so that teachers should start giving shocks to their students in the class when they are not learning well, I'm not going to get credit in any sort of credit for an answer like that because, of course, no psychologist is going to go about recommending to teachers, you give shocks so that your student learns well. So you have to think about some sort of realistic application which can be done ethically, which can be done. So when it comes to the Milgram study, definitely a practical application is to promote or encourage whistleblowing. We have countries in the world in which governments are actually encouraging whistleblowing by providing incentives to people who blow the whistle on their larger organization. So, who bring about how destructive obedience is taking place in the organization, so that the government can bring down such organizations which are engaging in destructive acts towards society. So, incentivized programs are being prepared to encourage whistleblowing and thereby to discourage destructive obedience. Right, so that is one thing, and of course, one which many of you all, especially AQA students, must have come across is how findings of studies like these are being used to promote ethical guidelines in psychological research. When Milgram did his study, there were no strong ethical guidelines, though Milgram was very ethical himself. He was actually the pioneer of debriefing and trying to restore participants' well-being at the end of such a traumatic study like the one which he'd conducted. But still, many psychologists felt that the procedure was not fair to begin with to the mental health of participants. Like we saw, some participants underwent seizures, some were in extreme states of nervousness and worry throughout the experiment. So, considering all the ethical problems that arose from his study, this study is always used as an example of what should not be done in psychological research. And edXL students must be knowing later when you see Berger's research, it's a very big ethical improvement over what Milgram had done. So in that sense, you can understand how this study has been used to actually consider which ethical guidelines need to be implemented in psychological research and how those guidelines can be promoted, like exactly what should be done to implement those guidelines. So it has also contributed practically to development of ethical guidelines to be maintained in psychological research. What you'll realize is a lot of evaluation points are those which, if you just think carefully about, you can come up with them yourself. One bad practice I'm seeing nowadays is to call it making up points. You're not making up things. You are thinking critically and coming down to logical or reasonable points. That's not making up. That's what critical thinking is. Okay. And so lots of points you'll see, like the first one, which I said, to promote whistleblowing, that is something that will strike to you immediately when you look at the Milgram study. Some practical guidelines are those which some evaluation points are those which you have to read a little about to get awareness. Like as far as Milgram's study has been an example of how ethical guidelines should not be breached, if you read about it in certain resources, you realize about these things. So many times students say how much to memorize for evaluation. Actually you don't have to memorize much. No doubt, like I said, one or two points maybe you have to pick up from here and there, which is not even compulsory. You can skip those points altogether. There's so much room and so much flexibility in evaluation. But even if you have to remember one or two points, the other points with your own critical thinking, you're able to come up with it. Like if we consider something like we did earlier, reliability. consistency in the procedure. That is something you'll be able to think about for yourself. Once you know what consistency is, what reliability is, you are able to apply it to any study. That is the sort of critical thinking they want in psychology. What makes you feel that they want a lot of rote memorization? That's not the case. So many authors, including Professor Flanagan, for instance, even she has emphasized on how maybe 1-2 points can be very well learned from the textbook for an evaluation, well, which brings to your eyes certain studies which have been done in the area, or what were the conditions at that time which are not there today. But then most of your points, even she recommends, would be something which you bring about from your own critical thinking. So that's why it's these things like grave analysis. Supposing right now you're thinking, I have so many subjects. Now for every study in psychology, will I have to make notes like this? You have to give time studying a subject. So your time for psychology would be well utilized making notes like this rather than just reading and rereading the textbook. So first of all, it is worth devoting that time to making these type of notes. Secondly, once you do it for a few studies, let's say you do it even literally for just 2 or 3 studies, you do a grave analysis like this, very soon you will realize that automatically you're able to think in these terms. It won't take much effort. Initially it will, then you get so used to thinking about studies like this that automatically, even when you're actually writing the paper, you just be able to write a critical point like reliability, ecological validity, generalizability, even application very, by yourself. Spontaneously, you will start thinking about these things after just a little bit of practice of such analysis that you do. So it's definitely worth the time. Okay, then in grave, the next thing that comes up is validity. Validity, as you know, is of 2 types. Actually, it is broadly internal, external. Within external, you have population validity, which I've already called generalizability, and you have ecological validity. Again, I've taken it there only. So external validity, population, and ecological, I'm not taking because I have already covered it in generalizability. If your preference is to take it under validity, you can take it here. I will focus only on internal validity. Internal validity is mainly about preventing extraneous variables from confounding results. So what you need to ask yourself is which extraneous variables in this study were prevented from influencing participants' behavior. I will not get into details of what are extraneous variables. I hope your research methods are clear. If you're not understanding basic things like standardization, extraneous variables, ecological validity, you need a severe revision of your research methods. And you should not be beginning with evaluation of specific studies without that revision. So I have made an assumption before making this video that you understand terms like these. But as you're coming across any such terms and you're not able to understand them, like you're not able to understand extraneous variables, that is just an indicator that your research methods are not clear. So first clarify them and then come back to this video. Coming to extraneous variables, whenever you have to think of extraneous variables, you need to think what is the behavior firstly that is being studied here. In Milgram's case, it is obedience which is being studied. Now, what does Milgram believe? Why are people being obedient? That's the next thing you need to think about. Milgram feels people are being obedient because the authority figure is pressurizing them, because the authority figure is using prods and that's why they have no option but to obey. Then you need to think, but can there be any other reason for why they are being obedient? Besides that, the authority figure is trying to pressurize them. Is there any other reason possible for their obedience? Yeah, like again, if you've learned certain things from the textbook, you could include those like locus of control in their personality. That's one. Or there can be other simple things like, again, I won't recommend very strongly that you take standard things, but if you can contextualize them, fine. At the time of the study, someone is distressed for some other reason, so they're not able to reason out enough, and that's why very easily they're just following whatever the authority figure is telling them, because at that time they're not in a state of thinking. That is possible. So that could be one reason why they're obeying, not particularly because of pressure of authority, because right now they are in a weak frame of mind. They are not able to think critically about what they are doing. That could be a reason. Other could be what we call a submissive type of a personality, whereby the person is not assertive enough to be able to stand up and say no. They fear saying no. It's not about authority figures in particular. In general, they are the agreeable type of people who find it difficult to refuse anybody, any requests or any orders. So again, it can be something to do with their personality. Or there could be situational factors. Like Milgram himself has acknowledged the reputation of the university where the study was being done, Yale University. Since it is very prestigious, many people might have assumed that a study taking place in this context has to be very, very worthwhile. So that is why this obedience is being seen. People feel we are in Yale University, whatever we are doing here is a very worthy cause, so we must obey to be able to contribute to this cause, not because they are intimidated by the experiment or the authority figure. That can be one reason. For now, in my notes, I would like to take locus of control, which is a very strong point for this study. So, as I've told you many possibilities, you might have many other possibilities. You can take any. People who are high on external locus of control, they are likely to be more obedient. As you can see, when I'm writing my notes, I don't get into elaborate explanations. I tell you, but when I'm writing, I write in a very focused way. So that is how you can make your notes as well. Once you know the reasoning behind something, you don't need to write every word of the reasoning. You'll be able to write it in the paper. Just make the outlines. Think of it as outlines that you're making for your evaluation. So when it comes to external locus of control, people who believe that others are responsible for their actions, they are the ones who are more likely to be obedient. So they easily get swayed by the authority figure's commands. But then those who have an internal locus of control, they tend to be less obedient. We had some defined participants in this study. They were also being equally pressurized by the authority figure to obey, but they did not. Why they did not do that? Because they felt it was wrong. They were responsible for their own actions. They had an internal LOC. So who obeyed, who did not obey could have just been a matter of locus of control in this study rather than the pressurizing commands being given by the authority figure. So that is also something that needs to be considered. Within validity, there are many types of validity like predictive, construct. Mostly I think you'll study these. Of course, there's content validity, concurrent, temporal validity. All sorts of validity are possible. I'm not taking all of them because right now I'm not having much time also to take everything. It will go beyond the scope of this lesson. And that's a very finer distinction. If you want, you can get into it. Orally, I'll just give you some examples. If you want to take temporal validity, for example, Milgram's study, though it is old, it has been done in the 60s, it has temporal validity. It's not outdated as such because obedience, whistleblowing, these are phenomena that are relevant even to today's society. So the idea of the study is definitely not outdated. Yes, the methods might be outdated. Like we saw the kind of pressure unethically being put on participants. Research wise, it might be irrelevant today. Like these studies wouldn't be allowed today. So it depends from which perspective you're discussing. Accordingly, you can say temporal validity is a strength or weakness. If you're taking predictive validity, for example, yes, Milgram, if we go by his findings, we will be able to predict that whenever there's too much pressure in a situation, people will obey because there are very high rates of obedience. 65% of participants obeyed, and in several replications till date, they have found that obedience levels are very, very high. So, predictive validity is very strong. We can easily predict people will obey in these situations. They've replicated across cultures with men and women. Except for that Austrian study in which women did not obey, in most cultures they have found most people, diverse backgrounds, they tend to obey. Coming to construct validity, does the study really measure obedience? Yes, because the authority figure, the prods that they are giving and the way they're giving, it's typical commands which are given to people, even in real settings. That is how obedience is sought, by giving commands or prods. So indeed, it is obedience that is being measured. We have taken an example. Some extraneous factors are possible. To that extent, then it might not be a matter of obedience. It might be about locus of control. But even if we take locus of control, in that also, what the authority figure is saying, that is interacting with locus of control to determine whether the person obeys or not. So construct validity is good of this study. It is really measuring obedience. Like I said, it's optional if you want to consider to this extent different types of validity, otherwise you can skip it. Finally, coming to E, which is ethics, ethical issues. One more thing I know is some of you might have learned the acronym differently. This is how we learn it. These are what the letters stand for. Some learn, I don't know, like E stands for ecological validity, but I consider ecological validity is either under generalizability or validity. So I take it as within that. But some students, the E in grave stands for ecological validity for them. So there might be slight distinction between how you have learned this acronym and how I'm presenting. So you can modify it a little that way. But I'm sure you're able to see that all considerations are getting covered here also in the way in which I am taking it. Coming to ethical issues, there are just too many. So again, it's not in the scope of this lesson for me to be able to take all of them. But from whatever ethics you have learned, you just have to consider two things: which ethics are followed and not followed in the study. So which are maintained and which are breached or violated. You need to consider both. Here the mistake students make is to be very one-sided. When it comes to ethics, they just take it as an attack towards the study. Like we have to give severe criticism. This is how they were harmed. This is what. But there are always some good things also when it comes to the ethics of a study. You have to be balanced and consider those as well. Like if you take Milgram's study, no doubt there's too much deception, there's harm being done to participants. But then what about the welfare that he took care of the participants in the debriefing? You cannot just skip that totally. So you have to look at both sides. That is what I can say. There are too many ethical guidelines to consider. I'll just name them: deception, debriefing, right to withdraw, confidentiality, privacy, valid consent, maximizing harm and benefit, maleficence and beneficence, which is same as the previous, and then the larger implications to society. I just forgot what we call that, but benefit to society or something. Also depends which board you're doing, it might be addressed differently. So there are too many ethics to look at. I won't be able to touch upon each for every study, and even you don't have to do that. You have to think critically, given the nature of this study, which of these are most relevant, either followed or not followed, but which are most prominent for the study. Talk only about those. Don't try to analyze one study with respect to each and every ethical guideline which is there. That's going to be too much. You won't be able to fit in that much in any sort of answer. So what you have to think is which are the most prominent or most relevant ethical. Many students feel issues is something very negative, and then they tend to ignore the positive side. So I would suggest you use the word consideration instead, if it helps you to keep a more balanced view. So which are the most prominent ethical considerations in this study? So when it comes to Milgram, for example, definitely deception. There's just way too much deception in the study. Just like standardization, you have to be able to give concrete examples. So when you're preparing your plan, you're doing your grave analysis, that time only think about, out of all the deception which was done in the study, which one do I want to bring about? So deception was in terms of, firstly, the teaching learning task itself was a deception. There was no such task being done. Actually, it was just to measure obedience. The role of the Confederates, being told that Mr. Wallace is the learner, and I forgot the name of the experimenter. These two were assistants of the researcher. None of them were really in the role which they were pretending to be in. The drawing of the role, whether the participant gets to be a teacher or a learner, drawing of chits, the rigged lottery which took place, all of this is deception. Of course, harm, both psychological and physical, in fact. So protection of harm was breached because some of the participants underwent seizures, some underwent nervous fits of laughter, and so many things. Some were digging their flesh, things like that. And of course, debriefing. On the good side, debriefing, there was a conciliatory meeting with Mr. Wallace, which helped to restore the well-being of participants, and they were assured that Mr. Wallace was fine. And later on, they Milgram followed up with the participants after up to a month, I think. I might be wrong, you can check it out. After how long did he follow them up to see that they were still okay, or whether they need the help of a counselor? He actually took a counselor with him to visit the participants to see if they were doing okay in the long term, and he found that they were fine. These are the guidelines you can consider. Depending on which study you're analyzing, you might need to consider some different guidelines. If it's an animal study, you have to consider different set of guidelines altogether. Keep that in mind. So Milgram is a human study, so I've considered these guidelines. If it was an animal study, most of you all have done Harlow study or McLaurin study, or you have done Fagan study, Hassett study, whichever is there in your syllabus. There you have to consider animal guidelines such as housing, procedural pain and distress, deprivation, reward, aversive stimuli. Those are the type of guidelines, not these. So just keep in view which sort of study you're looking at, that with animal participants or that with human participants. In IB, you might be doing the Rosenwig study, very commonly students take it, or the, which is that, Pauses and Kessner, I'm not getting the right name, or even the one in which the arms were amputated of the animals. I'm sorry, for the IB biological, I'm not remembering the name immediately, but there are so many studies. Lashley, I think, is one of the studies. So if those are the ones which you're taking, there's a different set of guidelines altogether, which you need to consider. These won't apply. Also not compulsory, but I would strongly recommend, which will help you in answer writing, is also to be able to know the justification of the ethics. So you could make quick pointers of that also when you're doing in an analysis. Researchers do not deliberately breach ethical guidelines. It's not that they're enjoying deceiving or harming participants and doing it just for the sake of it. They always have some reasoning why they're doing it. So if you know the justification, so you can think about them, that's going to be very helpful to you. Why did Milgram deceive the participants? Again, don't give standard replies like to reduce demand characteristics. Which demand characteristics? Had the participants suspected that the study was about obedience, they would have become more obedient to please the researcher, because that is what they would think they have to do, or they would be less obedient for desirability, to show that they do not engage in destructive obedience. So either case, they would have modified their obedience, which would have made it difficult to see their true levels of obedience. So that is the reason why deception had to be done. So always when you think of ethical guidelines, you can think of justifications from the researcher's perspective also. When it comes to harm, again, Milgram did not want to do it, but there were two reasons. One, it was inevitable. There's nothing to stop that from happening, what participants are feeling. So it's not deliberately designed into the study that they should get upset. Secondly, as Milgram has mentioned, he had done a pilot study, and what he was told was, no one will reach to these levels only of giving such high shocks. So he did not anticipate that this is the level to which he will be distressing people, because the pilot studies had misled him. The findings of this study are surprising even to him. Even he was not expecting. So had he known that this is what is going to happen, maybe he would have not conducted the study. We never know. But he did not know. So that's why it's justified. And of course, everything, deception, harm, etc., gets justified from larger benefits point of view. This study encourages whistleblowing, as we saw previously, so we can connect it to application to everyday life. This study encourages whistleblowing. It seeks to reduce destructive obedience in society, which can save the lives of millions, which can save millions of people from getting tortured. So keeping that in mind, that the applications are so beneficial to society, it's okay if some people had to suffer temporary psychological or physical harm. Also linking it to debriefing, given that Milgram did ensure that they were not suffering, like neither in short term nor in long term. It's okay, because whatever harm was there was quite momentary. He made sure that it did not go very far with them. Also, you can talk about the guilt aspect. Yeah, many of them must have felt very guilty and ashamed of themselves, but upon realizing to what extent they could be obedient. But again, same way, it gets justified in the larger picture. So this is how we can do grave analysis of a study. I'm just in a bit of rush right now. I'll have to finish the class. I will upload this document on my website. You can download it for future reference. And yeah, if you want to know how to like use this analysis in writing a good answer, in the last I gave you an example of how you can link ethics to application, or you can cross link ethical issues against each other. So if you want to learn more about this, you want to learn how to put the analysis in the paper, or you want help in grave analysis for further studies, just like I've done it for Milgram, you need guidance on how to be able to do it for other studies. There's no shame in asking for help. So you can contact me for personal tuition. I can help you out with all such things. My phone number and WhatsApp number is the same. I'll put in the description box below. My email ID also I'll put it. You can contact me there for any personalized help that you need. When it comes to anything you want to say about this video, you have any feedback, you have suggestions for further videos to be made, or something you need more clarification about in this video, you can post such things in the comments box below. Strictly in the comments box below, I will answer them and I'll know that it is relevant to this video. Okay, so thank you for watching, and I'll try to come up with similar videos soon which will be helpful across boards and which will actually give you some skills in psychology, not just being able to like look at answers of particular questions or particular studies, but which will help you universally across all sorts of answer preparation you need to do. Okay, so I'll come back with something like that soon. That's it for today. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.